Hello, Phil here from Wings of Pegasus and welcome to another video. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a thumbs up and subscribe. On the agenda tonight, I'm going to be demonstrating and explaining some common guitar techniques that pop up all the time in the analysis videos that I do here on the channel, looking at other guitarists. And this is for those of you that don't play the guitar and don't know what the techniques are called or what they sound like. But also, I did have a lot of questions over on Patreon from guitarists about the techniques that I'm going to be demonstrating in this video, so I will be addressing those questions as well. So if you do play, there might be something that you can get out of this video as well. Just so you know, because it's a long video, I'm going to pin a comment to the top of the comment section that have timestamps on there. So if you know what hammer-ons and pull-offs are, but you don't know what economy picking is, you'll be able to click on the timestamp in that comment and it'll take you straight to that part of the video. The guitar that I'm going to be using in this video is the Ibanez Gem Steve Vai signature model. This is the guitar that Mario sent me. Everybody say hello to Mario. But it does lend itself to heavier tones, so it is quite overdriven. There isn't a hell of a lot of distortion on the amp that I was using, but the guitar has got humbuckers on there. It makes it a lot more distorted sounding, but hopefully it'll be okay for you guys, and the distortion is required to demonstrate some of the techniques. But without further ado, let's get into the video. So the first technique we're going to get into is the one that I mention all the time, vibrato or vibrato, depending on where you're from. And this is the technique that gives a player their expression and their sound and a sound of control when they're playing. And just quickly before we start, tremolo is not vibrato. It's one of those things that gets mixed up all the time. I think the confusion started where guitar companies would call the whammy bar on their guitar the tremolo arm or the tremolo. And the difference between the two is, I'll start with vibrato. You can hear it's a change in pitch of the note. It's not just a straight note, the pitch is changing, whereas tremolo is an increase and decrease in volume. If I was to do a quick example of that, it means that the volume is pulsing in and out. So that's the difference between those two, and they get mixed up all the time. So getting into the technique and the way that you achieve it on the guitar, we're playing the string and then changing the pitch of that string. Kind of like that. So what's happening in super slow motion is I'm bending that string up and down and getting a smooth wave from that sound. That's the goal in order to get a nice controlled vibrato. And you can have different speeds. You can have really fast, which is uncontrolled sometimes and sounds a little bit nasty. It's one of those things that, in my opinion, having that really fast, uncontrolled vibrato, I don't like the sound of that. I prefer to have a nice, smooth vibrato. Again, it's all down to personal taste. So the vibrato that I'm demonstrating at the moment is known as a blues rock vibrato. Kind of like that. We've also got a classical vibrato, which obviously is used in classical music on classical guitars, and that is just from side to side. As you can hear, it's a lot more subtle. But the blues rock vibrato is the one that you'll see most players using. There is another one called circular vibrato, which is a really subtle vibrato. You sometimes see Steve Vai playing with that vibrato. Again, it's like the classical side-to-side vibrato, just really subtle. Another thing to mention is that you might see a player pushing up on the string to get their vibrato or pull down on the string. Whether you prefer to push or pinch the string, it's up to you, whichever you find most comfortable. What you'll tend to find is that on the lower strings, it will start to be a bit of a pinch because you don't want your playing to go off the fretboard. So if I'm going, that little bit of vibrato on that G, if I was to push that up, I go off the fretboard. So I pinch down for vibrato on that low E string, sometimes on the A string as well. As you get higher up the guitar, if I'm going, once you get to that high E string, you want to push up, because if I go and pinch down, I'm going off the fretboard again. And the next technique is hammer-ons and pull-offs. This is something that I mention all the time as well, and this is pretty easy to explain, because when you're playing the guitar and you pick a note, you get that sound, and if you pick another note, you get that sound. So if I'm picking those two, you can hear those picks. A hammer-on and a pull-off is getting the same sound, or attempting to get the same sound, by hammering onto the string. So I'm picking the first note, and I'm hammering on with my third finger. I didn't pick it, but you still heard the note. Like that. That's a hammer-on. Then pulling off is when you pull off the string, and you use the sustain that you've got from the previous note. Like that. Pulling away off the string is called a pull-off. And somebody asked on Patreon, how do you get your hammer-ons and pull-offs to have the same volume, sound the same as your picked notes? So when we've got those picked notes, you want to try and get the same volume, the same sound between those two. And what I would suggest is, first of all, your hammer-ons have got to be really solid in terms of coming down onto that string with force. You can hear that when I'm picking that string, the hammer-ons are about the same volume as my initial pick. And exactly the same is going to happen when you pull off the string. You want to really pull off with some force, and the direction of the pull off is really important here. What a lot of people do is they pull off too vertically, so going, and all they're doing is taking their finger off the fretboard, whereas what you want to do is push into the guitar and pull down and try and pull in to the string underneath, that E string. So the E string underneath, from the B string here, if I wasn't muting that, this is what you'd hear. I'm pulling off into those strings, but because my first finger's muting it, we're not hearing the E string at the top, and I can really push into the guitar and pull down. And it's all quite messy when you've got those other strings ringing out, and that's why with that first finger you find that position, and then you can really push into that guitar and pull off that string and not worry about hitting that high E string because it's muted. And you'll start to be able to get a consistent sound with your hammer-ons and your pull-offs and your picking as well. And just a quick example of a hammer-on and a pull-off run. Something like that, where you get a really nice smooth sound. And when I'm talking about players using hammer-ons and pull-offs and the legato sound that they can achieve with that, legato means long and smooth sounding. That's what I'm referring to, these hammer-ons and pull-offs that are less aggressive than when you alternate pick runs. And this leads us on to alternate picking, which is as it sounds. We're just alternating the picking on this right hand. So if you put your focus on that right hand, you can see how I'm picking every single note of that run. Kind of like that. And when you have hammer-ons and pull-offs, you get that smoother sound. What tends to happen with alternate picking is it becomes more important on acoustic guitar and really clean tones, because you don't get a hell of a lot of sustain on the notes that you're playing. Obviously on acoustic guitar you're not going through an amp, you haven't got distortion or any sustain at all, you just have to make do with the strings. So you have to make sure that you alternate pick as much as you can, and on electric guitar it's a lot easier because you can use hammer-ons and pull-offs rather than having to really accentuate all of those picks. And it's just one of those things that depending on how you want to sound, you can work at your alternate picking or you can use hammer-ons and pull-offs, it's up to you. And then we get into tapping, which a lot of people will associate with Van Halen and a lot of 80s players, but Van Halen really brought it into the mainstream. And tapping is basically putting a hammer-on and a pull-off in with your right hand. So if I'm playing these notes on my left hand, doing a hammer-on and a pull-off, like that, and then I tap in with my right hand, the That's all that's happening. And I'm using exactly the same technique with the right hand as I do with the left hand, in terms of I'm hammering down and then pushing down and away with my finger. Some people pull up with their taps. It's just up to your personal preference. And tapping is one of those techniques that I spent a fair amount of time working on because it was part of the sound that I liked in the 80s, and I wanted to have that as part of my arsenal. But like I mentioned at the beginning of the video, just work on the techniques that give you your sound and make you sound how you want to when you play the guitar. The other thing that you can do with these techniques on the left hand, introducing more fingers, means that you're going to get a more complicated sounding run. For example, and as you could see on that run, as I work my way through it, I use the second and the third finger on my right hand to get a hammer-on and pull-off there, which will make it sound a little bit more fancy and a little bit more 80s. You can also do slides with the right hand. That's something that you might have heard before. Kind of like that. So there are things that you can do with these techniques to just make them sound how you want to, and even make them more complicated if you want to as well. You can also tap onto open strings as well. Some players, especially acoustic players nowadays on YouTube, are tapping on to open strings and multiple strings. If you're tapping onto an open string, you'll get that kind of sound, and all that's happening there is I'm hammering on with my first finger, my third finger, and then the second finger of my right hand, and then pulling off all the way back down again from that second finger to third finger to first finger to open string. Kind of like that. And again, it's one of those things you can spend as much time as you want on tapping. I don't want to get distracted with it in this video. Thank you for watching this video, guys. I hope you found it interesting. I am going to be uploading another 2 or 3 videos that are focusing on different elements. In the next video, we'll be looking at pentatonic shape 1, the blues scale, also palm muting and bends, and then we do cover a lot more techniques after that. As I said, it'll be 2 or 3 videos after this first one. Anyway, thank you guys. I'll see you guys at the next video. Keep your suggestions coming in the comments below for the analysis videos. And if you enjoyed this video, please give it a thumbs up and subscribe. And I'll see you guys at the next one. Rock!